fantasy short stories. Of Portals and Portents by Lesley Herron. Chapter 23, Orpiment. The Prime Minister, exhausted from the lack of rest, looked up from the stack of papers in his hand to the door of his office. There was a commotion growing louder just on the other side. He had barely a moment to react when, "Chester!" The heavy wooden door burst open with enough force that it swung inward and bounced off the wall. Instinctively, he jumped back, but his foot caught on the rug, and, tossing the files into the air, he toppled over one of the plush armchairs. Piper scanned around the room, glaring through the blizzard of fluttering parchment. "Get out here and speak to me!" She took a step forward when she realized she wasn't alone. A man, dressed in simple finery and a heavy golden mask, climbed to his feet to face her. In the span of a single breath, she had gazed upon that golden visage and then was nearly thrown to the floor as a half-dozen armed men poured into the room behind her. They grabbed at her, shoving the ends of their weapons against her skin, and one pushed his boot into the back of her leg. Piper cried out as her knees hit the hard floor. She did, however, manage to wrangle free her mechanical arm and slammed her fist into the gut of the nearest one, eliciting a cry of pain before they managed to properly restrain her. "Stop!" Chester managed to claw his way halfway back to his feet, waving frantically at the soldiers. "She is my adoptive daughter!" When the robed figures failed to heed him, he turned towards the scholar. "Please!" When the man in the golden mask lifted a hand, Piper felt several grips slacken, and she shook them off, giving each one a hateful glare. Varen had told her a little of the dangers this brotherhood posed, and, while she wanted to trust that the Prime Minister was smart enough to be wary of who he allied himself with, she felt that notion fade with every monk and soldier that stepped from the room. Each one had a terrifying weapon slung over their shoulders, but she had only heard the one side of the story, and she knew firsthand how prejudice could mislead. She shook the thoughts from her mind and rounded towards the desk that Chester was currently attempting to scale and leveled a dangerous glare in his direction. "Piper, what are you doing here?" Chester moved himself into the armchair, his neat plait of blonde hair unraveling from stress. He glanced sadly at the new disarray of his paperwork before taking a steadying breath and forcing that lazy grin on his face as he met eyes with the girl. Shouldn't you be at home, relaxing with your brother?" Piper glanced at the narrow bookshelves that lined the room, crammed with leather volumes and rolled maps. The fine oak desk stacked with so many teetering piles of paperwork. Then to Chester himself in the plush leather armchair. He looked sick, almost malnourished, or simply spread too thin. It didn't matter. She narrowed her eyes. "Why is my friend locked up?" Chester held up a hand. "Piper, I assure you Prince Varen is perfectly fine." "Oh yes, perfectly fine. No record of his arrests, no outside contact, hidden away in some secret room in the college. A perfectly normal way to treat a guest." He shouldn't have been surprised that Piper would have latched on to Vel's duplicate. Chester let out an exasperated sigh and let the smile fall from his tired face. "How did you find out that we even had him here? That's a closely guarded secret." "You just have to know who to ask. And don't dodge my question." She leveled a metal finger at him. Chester nodded. He had a feeling he knew who had leaked the information. Only a handful of people had been told in the first place. They had secretly moved Varen into one of the more obscure areas of the college, in hopes that nobody, especially Elias, would think to find him there. "The prince is only under arrest for the time being. First and foremost, we need to make sure his intentions are not to aid his brother in an attempt to overthrow this city." "He would never do such a thing." She pushed her clenched fists to her hips.
he and his brother had this falling out.
The scholar folded his hands in front of him as he glanced casually out the tiny square window.
Your friend and his sibling have a history of aiding one another, push come to shove. Our organization has tried to work with him before, only to see his allegiances change the moment his mood shifted. While his fate is yet undecided, I have petitioned the Prime Minister to seek justice for his past betrayals.
Justice?
Piper whirled her attention to the golden figure.
Oh, he's told me all about your brand of justice. The prince ain't done a lick of bad, and certainly nothing warranting handing him over to the likes of you. In fact,
she turned her glare on the Prime Minister.
He saved me life, and Atticus, and all them stuffy floaters. You should be thanking him, not arresting him. It's this fancier here who's done all the backstabbing.
Chester pinched the bridge of his nose. For a living god of knowledge, the scholar lacked the subtle nuances of navigating a conversation with a woman like Piper. He reached up.
All of which I am taking into consideration. But the truth is, for right now, it doesn't matter.
He jabbed a finger against a map on the table.
From reports, Elias just attacked a major city to the south. The Brotherhood was there, attempting to lend aid when he struck. The few survivors that managed to escape alive claim to have seen an airship heading roughly north not a day later.
He looked up.
Need I remind you of the damage he did to this city without his magic?
Piper looked down at the map. It had been heavily edited, with so many new cities and forests scribbled in that it was no longer recognizable. When she met Chester's gaze, his words struck a chord with her, and she felt an ember of anger flare to life.
If that madman arrives at our gates, I need every tool available to hold him off.
Tool?
Piper's eyes slowly widened. She knew how the Prime Minister's mind worked. He preferred unfair leverage over confrontation.
You plan to use him as a hostage?
Lowering his gaze from hers, Chester nodded.
It is one option of several. If the scholar is right that they value family ties so heavily, then it could be a way to end the confrontation before one even begins.
And what if he wants to kill Herron instead? From what I've heard, that's the more likely outcome.
All the more reason to keep him away from you.
Chester gave a weak shrug of his shoulders.
And we have contingencies. Troops positioned to converge should he head that way.
You mean he's bait?
It wasn't a question. Unable to control her bubbling anger any longer, she slammed her mechanical hand against the desk. The towers of paperwork toppled, and a pair of joined picture frames nearly fell to the floor. At a glance, she saw each one contained different members of his family. She recognized the faces of his actual children, Danny and Theodore, standing with others she didn't know. And the second held the wide grins of herself and her brother, a rare photo of their childhood, Atticus's 9th birthday if she wasn't mistaken. She felt a twinge in her chest, though from which emotion she wasn't entirely sure. She snatched up the photos, shoving them at him.
What if it was me or Atticus he wanted? Or Vel? Would you give us up too?
With a growl, Chester snatched the frames from her outstretched fist.
Of course not. Your family.
Yeah? Then why do I trust the prince right now more than you?
You can't know him, Piper. You just met the man. He's not Vel.
He took a deep breath, setting down the frame.
Maybe you'll understand someday, but as a parent,
You're not my father!
Her chest throbbed as she hurled the phrase like venom. She took a step back, as surprised by her words as he was. The expression on his face broke her heart, but she wasn't wrong, as much as she wanted to be.
You never have been.
She fled, determined that he wouldn't see her cry. Even after she was gone, it took Chester a few moments to compose himself. There comes a time in every adoptive parent's life where they must prepare themselves for those words, but knowing it would come and having it happen were two different things. It cut into his heart with more precision than a scalpel. And worse, he had probably deserved it. He reached over and brushed his fingers against the framed picture of Piper and her brother, then Danny and Theodore. The towering man in the golden mask turned towards him.
I realize you may not be in the best state of mind right now, but I must ask, does this change your plan?
Gently, he pushed down the framed pictures. He wasn't proud, but he would do what a father had to do. No. That thin shaft of wood, covered in runes and smeared with blood, tilted ever so slightly, and Atlas felt the ship adjust course once more. The vessel had been mended with dark magic, but now it was also being controlled by it. He glanced over to the repaired helm, held together with twisted vines and gently being steered by wisps of glittering void. His features became dark as his gaze landed on the king, pacing behind it while arguing with himself or some unseen entity.
No, you promised.
Atlas turned away to tug uselessly at his iron shackles. The twins had paid him little mind once the tracking spell had been anchored to the ship, save to occasionally check in on him or have him reignite the magic that fueled the tracking spell. It only lasted a few hours at a time, an issue with the spell he had hoped they were unaware of, but they refused to let him go. Either Eric had been paying too close attention when they used the spell for their own tracking needs, or Elias had been informed by the monster riding around in his skull. He grit his teeth, tugging against the manacles once more. They would get theirs, and Theara help them if something happened to Barry.
Hey, stop trying to escape.
Atlas rolled his one eye, swiveling it to land on Eric with a patronizing look.
Oh, aye, you've caught me. I'm trying to break free using my godlike strength so I can escape over the side of the railing, land on the ground 100 feet below, and, what, outrun the magic ship of doom?
Rolling his own eyes, Eric folded his arms across his chest.
You're an arcanist. How would I know?
He looked down at the chain.
Just stop messing with the manacles.
Oh, don't like seeing me in shackles, do you? Atlas gave a few unnecessarily noisy tugs of the chain. They were only ordinary iron, crude and simple by design, and as such, they didn't actually prevent him from casting. But iron was impervious to magic itself, meaning he couldn't just explode his way out. With the chain anchored to the deck by a thick magic vine, Atlas had been forced into an uncomfortable sitting position, keeping him from scratching out runes in the deck. Annoyingly effective, but not without weakness.
It's been barely 30 minutes since I recast the tracking spell, so what do you want? Come to nanny me or just stab me in the back again? Hold on, here, let me...
He shuffled around on his behind until he was facing away from the doctor.
Is that better?
Long past the point of feeling regret for his decisions, Eric clicked his tongue against his teeth.
You can drop the attitude, all right? I'm not the bad guy here. You left Barry to die! Unlikely, but even if he does, I should be able to erase the event. No harm, no foul.
Atlas shook his head in disbelief as he shuffled back around to face the man.
You're sounding more like him than he is. He nodded towards Elias. And in case you missed it, he's quickly becoming a babbling idiot.
Eric glanced up at his duplicate. The king was radiating waves of violet as his head twitched side to side.
He'll be fine. Fine? Listen, I know you haven't studied magic to the same degree as someone who, earned it, but even you have to see the issue here. Where does Elias get his power?
Eric had heard this argument before.
He draws it from the land, which I agree is detestable, but do you see any land up here?
Eric paused, pushing his glasses up his nose.
I suppose not. So that leaves two options. Either A, he's burning through his own shade, which we can both agree would have killed him by now. Or B, that thing in his head has grown strong enough to start doing things on its own. Probably a bit of both.
Eric sighed. He had tried speaking to Elias earlier, but the man drifted in and out of lucidity, barely aware of his surroundings.
You're probably right. It just means we have to hurry.
He looked back over at the Arcanist.
Just refresh the spell again. We're nearly to the city, and, I don't know, something tells me it's gonna get a bit hectic from here on out. Oh, aye! And then I'll be able to earn my freedom.
Atlas spat at the man's feet, glowering up at him.
If I had known you would turn on me like this, I would have left you for dead in that forest.
Eric took a step back.
I know you're mad, but trust me. This will all work out in the end. You can grit your teeth at me all you want, but before you know it, you and Barry will be reunited, and none of this will have happened.
It was clear to Atlas that it didn't matter what he said. The doctor and his twin had become so focused on this current path that nothing could convince either of them otherwise. He chewed on his cheek and turned his gaze elsewhere. Eric snatched up the wooden shaft and handed it to him. For a split second, Atlas considered turning the rod to ash, just to spite them. But that wouldn't help him get to Barry. With a sigh, he flooded the runes with magic and chucked it to the deck a few paces away from Eric, forcing him to walk over and fetch it. He waited for the man to take the object and leave before rising to his feet, the shackles forcing him to hunch over awkwardly. He barely managed to see the city over the edge of the railing, but there it was. Looking over his shoulder, the doctor had returned to the king's side, trying his best to converse with the man. All right, time to put some of those old-school lessons to practice. Subtlety was key here. Over the last few hours, he had been using magic to slowly char away the inside of the vine that held his shackles to the deck. With that weakened, he could use his godlike strength to rip himself free. Then he could escape over the side of the ship and, with any luck, run away fast enough to not get recaptured. It was a perfect plan. He just needed something a little higher to land on than the ground. He looked over the railing as they glided silently along. The thick forests had given way to farmland with the occasional village and small homesteads. But coming up fast was a complex view of blackened roads mixed with cobblestones. There were even glittering buildings that shone like gemstones in the afternoon sun, tempting him from not that far down. He had survived a scuffle or two in his youth, long before learning he was an Arcanist. If he managed to catch one of the taller buildings, it couldn't be much worse, right? Doing a quick bout of mental math in his head, he figured he could fling himself overboard, catch hold of a trailing balloon tether, and drop down onto one of the taller buildings as they passed overhead. Perhaps that tall one near the edge of the city with the large black and gold banner on it. There was a good chance he'd probably break something, but he had no guarantee that these two idiots were going to let him go. He couldn't risk staying. not with Barry left out there all alone. He had just sent a silent prayer to Theara that the doctor and his twin would remain preoccupied when an eruption of sound cut through his focus and sent a cold shiver down his spine.
The Brotherhood!
Elias's voice. No, not just his voice. There was something darker there. Before Atlas could ponder what it was, the ship itself shook in rage and began gaining speed as it rocketed towards the city. He could hear Eric shouting something to the king, but his attention was on the bannered tower they were approaching fast. With a yank, Atlas ripped free his chains from the deck and sprinted for the edge of the ship. It was then, halfway over the edge of the railing and facing the encroaching structure, that he realized the black and gold cloth depicted an image of a feathered quill over an open book. The Brotherhood. Damn, they moved in fast. At a second glance, he saw that the tower was crawling with soldiers, each aiming a metal fire stick in their direction.
Guys?
Atlas pulled himself back on board and began retreating away from the edge of the ship as several tiny black dots down below were wheeling out a massive siege weapon.
I don't like the looks of that.
He gestured out with a shaking hand. Catching the tremble in the Arcanist's voice, Eric spun around. His gaze fell upon a clunky and blocky device mounted atop two massive wheels that supported a dozen metal tubes, each one the size of a man. At a glance, it looked like some sort of rudimentary rocket launcher. He didn't get a second moment to ponder this as he saw a flash of something igniting. It was the rapidly approaching object that followed the explosion that confirmed his suspicions.
Crap! Would you rather accidentally arc-weld your belt buckle to a doorknob, or mistake a container of used engine lubricant for a pot of coffee?
Atticus grinned at the tiny merc expectantly.
Like that? A little less nerd-specific, maybe?
Evan climbed up onto an empty desk to sit on its flat surface, his little legs dangling over the edge.
More like, would you rather go hungry for a week or eat a gallon of warm mayonnaise in a single sitting?
Atticus nodded seriously, stroking his chin in thought.
And you're sure this is Vel's favorite game?
Absolutely! Evan couldn't fully suppress the giggle, but he felt like he played it off convincingly innocent.
He can't get enough of it.
Winter paused his nervous pacing to glance in their direction.
I know you guys have a whole wackadoo of things going on right now, but couldn't we have found a less risky place to hang out? Like, I don't know, someplace not swarming with soldiers?
He scratched at his scruff nervously, in almost a dog-like fashion.
Also, in my experience, you kind of need alcohol to play a drinking game.
Pshaw!
Evan waved him off.
First of all, does Brainiac here look old enough to drink? And second, just because they arrested Varen doesn't mean they want to arrest us. Right, Afrosas?
From the corner of the abandoned classroom, a snoozing figure tugged his hat further down over his eyes before raising a hand in a thumbs up.
It's pronounced Alphonse, Atticus corrected. And besides, nobody uses this classroom anymore. Not since I presented my first-year class project in it.
He stuck his pinky finger into his ear, wiggling it around.
Now it's structurally unsound or something.
With a yelp like a surprised animal, Winter shot a glance up to the ceiling. He noticed, for the first time, large, deep cracks in the plaster and several blackened scorch marks. He swallowed hard and began edging towards a portion of the room that looked less damaged when the door banged open and he all but screamed, diving for cover under one of the desks. Accustomed to loud noises and explosions, Atticus simply turned his attention to the noise to see his sister stomping in. He was never great with what Alphonse called social cues, but he could tell something was wrong. Her cheeks were flushed with color, her fists balled at her sides, and, judging by how red her eyes were, she had been crying.
"Are you okay, Piper?"
She slammed her fist into the brick wall near the blackboard, causing it to come loose and clatter to the floor. The slew of profanities and curses she let loose were loud enough to mask the cry of terror that emanated from beneath one of the desks. Evan's expression sank. "I take it talks did not go well?" They had hoped sending the girl would be their best bet, being as close to the Prime Minister as she was.
"No."
There weren't enough words in her vocabulary for her to articulate her anger. She was mad that Chester didn't believe her, that her new friend had been imprisoned for helping her, that Vel was not here, and, above all else, she was mad at the way she had left things. She needed something else to focus on. She wiped the leaking tears from her eyes and turned to face the others.
"They plan on using him for blackmail, or failing that, to lure Elias into a trap. You all can do whatever you want, but I'm busting him out."
Evan nearly fell off the desk.
"Wait, back up, what?"
She turned to the figure in the corner.
"Al, you know where he's being kept at, correct?"
Sitting up, Alphonse's dozing mind snapped to attention, and he nearly jostled the hat from his head.
I do, but listen."
"Then lead me there and we can bust him out before they have a chance to move him."
"Hold on, I never said."
She stamped a foot.
"Damn it, Al, if you won't come, draw me a map."
Atticus reached out an arm towards her.
"Piper, that's a really bad idea."
She slapped his arm away, feeling the stinging heat rising behind her eyes again.
"I don't care. I'm not going to let him die."
She spun, heading for the door.
"You all can sit here, but I'm going to go do something." "Hey!"
Evan stood up on the desk, still a foot shorter than her.
"I care about him just as much as you, Missy. And if you think storming into a heavily guarded room is gonna get you anywhere, then you aren't half as smart as Varen thought you were."
She stopped, hand on the doorknob. After a shuddering breath, she managed to whisper,
"It's my fault he's here in the first place. I can't just do nothing."
The tiny merc rolled his eyes.
"And nobody here said you should. Of course we're gonna go bust him out. We just have to be smart about it."
A weak smile broke through the pained expression, but Piper wiped them both clean, turning around with a serious look.
"I suppose you're right. Since Plan A didn't work, what do you have in mind? First, that's what you get for not naming your plans."
Evan waved a lofty hand.
"Things always succeed with an epic title. How about Operation Thunder Freedom, yeah?"
"That sounds like something I read out of one of my novels."
Atticus reached into the prince's bag he had been holding on to since their journey on the back of Percival, fishing around for said book. Winter poked his hairy face out from beneath the desk, keeping a wary eye on the ceiling, as though he expected it to collapse at any moment.
"Do you even know where he's at?"
Puffing out his chest, Alphonse stood, straightening his hat as he did.
"Of course I do. The Prime Minister doesn't entrust this information to just anyone." "And do you know exactly what the security measures are like?"
Winter stepped out from his protective hiding place.
"'Cause if we're gonna be barging towards danger, I want to know exactly what kind of trouble we're gonna be getting into."
Alphonse deflated a little.
"Well, the good news is, yes, I know where he is, and I can get you to the right building. I've got enough clearance to get you through any checkpoints."
He fidgeted with his fingers. With a shrug, Evan hopped down off his desk.
"No problem. Between me and Unit 2, we should be able to handle a few pistol-toting padres." There's at least a dozen Brotherhood Templars swarming the place, and I'm not about to become an enemy of an occupying army for you lot. Sorry, I got me more to worry about. Al grimaced. You're just too short on manpower. Eyes squinting into dangerous slits, Evan threw a finger up towards the soldier. Was that a short joke? But when the only response was a flounder of words, he dropped his shoulders. A sassafras has a point. After a few quiet moments, Winter gingerly raised a hand. What about a distraction? Something to lure them away, like in the movies. Piper nodded. I've no idea what a movie is, but I like the idea of a distraction. All eyes turned to Atticus, who blinked at them in return. He waited for an explanation, and when none came, a worried look settled into his features. What? Evan rolled his eyes. I've known you for almost a week, and even I know you have a knack for causing chaos. The others all nodded in agreement, to which Atticus huffed. Yeah, but all that was accidental. I've never intentionally caused problems. It's not like I can just wave my hand and cause an explosion somewhere off in the distance. He waved his hand to demonstrate, and a distant echoing boom shook the room hard enough to send down a dusting of loose plaster. Atticus stared in awe at his own hand, then grinned up at his sister. I think I'm a wizard. We thank you for joining us for this chapter of the novel of Portals and Portents, Book 4 by Lesley Herron in this ongoing series available here on Tall Tale TV. You can find links in the description to where you can listen to all her books and novellas, with new chapters appearing as they are being written and recorded. Oh, Val, we're back from the other food stations. We found all manner of new culinary delights.
I think I'll pass. I still don't feel great after that taco.
Oh, pshaw. It wasn't that bad. Here, we have a few options. Would you rather have this greasy corn dog slathered in mustard and hot Cheeto powder?
Please, no.
Or we managed to acquire this large jar of jelly beans.
Jelly? Beans?
Yes. Undine guessed how many were in it, and they just gave
Val,
it to us.
would you rather?
Jelly beans?
Jelly beans? Jelly beans?
Holy cannoli!
No!
Val!
No, thank you. I need to go now.
What was that all about? Who knows? Maybe the taco really did do a number on him. Jelly bean? Oh, thank you. Oh, God. The black ones taste like sautéed toenail fungus.